This is part 2 of the Delta 7-inch motor-driven grinder rebuild series. If you haven't seen part 1, click the link at the top of the screen. In this video, we're going to begin the disassembly. Hello everyone, I'm Jeff and welcome to my shop. We got a lot to cover, so let's get to it. So the first thing I'm going to do is begin to remove the Quinch Cup on the side, and that Quinch Cup bar that sits under it, the bracket, is supposed to come out of there, but it's really rusted in there, so we'll figure out how to get that out of there later on. Next, we're going to go ahead and remove the Twin-Lites. So it's got these two cap nuts on top, and when we pull them off of there, the Twin-Lites can lift straight up. So if they were still connected by wires, then you're going to need to disconnect those wires before you can completely remove them, but those wires were cut, and we're going to be replacing all that wiring anyways. But on the underside, you can see the bulbs, and we'll disassemble those a little bit later. And on these two screws, there is some sheathing. We're just going to pull that off of there. Next, we're going to go ahead and remove the tool rest. So we've got the one on the left-hand side. And I mentioned before that somebody had welded a plate in the gap that's in that tool rest. And you'll get to see a better close-up of it in a little bit here, but it has just a single screw on the side with two washers, I believe. There goes one. I'm just sort of looking at it going, what the hell's going on with that thing? And the other washer's still on the screw. So there's your two washers. And there's the screw. And next, this armature or bracket for the tool rest is a two-piece design that allows you to get a whole wide range of angles with that tool rest for whatever you want to use it for. And it's going to have probably two washers and the screw as well. Yep. And that looks like it's just fine. It's got a lot of paint on it, but other than that. And then we've got one more screw, and this will remove the part of the tool rest that slides in and out of the side covers for the wheels, but it's kind of stuck in there, so I'm just going to use this brass punch and tap it out of there. And I mentioned in the introduction video that the bottom rail for this is broken off. It's still functional, but I went ahead and replaced that side anyways, but we'll take a look at that a little bit later. So it's missing the spark arrestor on the left side. It has it on the right side, and here we are just removing the screw that holds the spark arrestor in place. And we're going to come back to that screw in a little bit. There's a washer on there, but it was painted in place, and that washer is kind of stuck to the screw. So now we're going to remove the right side tool rest. And there's the screw. And no washers. But here we've got the left and the right, and you can see where that welded piece is on the left one. So we're going to cut that out of there. And then we're going to finish disassembling the bracket or armature for the tool rest. So that has a screw, and it should have 2 washers on it. There's one, and the other one was there. And then we have that last screw that holds the bottom part or the in and out part of that armature. And it's really on there. So we'll just cheat a little bit with the brass hammer. And it's not really moving, so let's spray some PB Blaster on it. See if that doesn't help it out. So in the meantime, we're going to go ahead and just remove this side screw. And this is what holds the Quinch Cup bracket in place, and you can lock it down so it doesn't move all over the place, but no big deal. Now we're going to go back and work on this screw for the armature for the tool rest, and it comes right out now. That PB Blaster is some awesome stuff. And again, this side is kind of stuck in there as well, so we'll tap it out with the brass punch. And I don't think I'm getting a whole lot of purchase on it here. I can't see it from where I've got it, and I was trying to keep everything in camera. So we're just going to turn this sucker to the side so we can see it a little better. And then drive it out. Too easy. So next we're going to remove the outside covers, and these have 3 screws on them. And in the middle of that, I decided I wanted to go ahead and get that washer off of that one screw. So this is how I do it. You can barely see the vise in the bottom of the image here. I kind of just rest it in the vise and tap the screw through the washer like that. Back at the cover, we're removing the second screw. And then the third screw. And then the outer cover will just come right off of there. That one's in good shape. Here we are on the left side, doing the same thing. And this cover is a little chewed up. If you look kind of near the bottom of the opening, where you can see the wire wheel in there, kind of right above my left finger now, that area there is kind of chewed up from that wire wheel, but no big deal. And again, it just pulls right off of there. So next we're going to go ahead and remove the 2 wheels. And this is probably the thing about grinders that I don't like really is I've got a newer grinder, and it has a button that you can press that kind of locks the shaft in place to be able to remove and install those wheels. But these older ones don't have that, and so you kind of got to work both ends of that shaft. Now keep in mind that one of these screws is a left-hand thread and the other one is a right-hand thread. So, or the nuts that are on the shaft itself. But once we got the left one off, we can then remove that. It's like a cup washer that sits on that side there. And then the wheel should come off of there. Might have to help it a little. God only knows how long it's been on there, so. And there we go. It's coming off now. And we're obviously going to replace both of these wheels. And there is a nut on the shaft where I've just connected that socket, but it's not really, it's kind of loose on that side, so it's not offering any resistance, and so this thing just wants to free spin. That jingling noise is my dog shaking his collar. So my plan will be just to go ahead and remove that nut on that side. There it is. And then on this side, since we're going to replace these wheels, I'm just going to put a pair of vice grips on this wheel. And that'll give me something to hold the shaft in place while I undo the nut on this side. And there it goes. And then we can spin it off of there. Then we've got that large flat washer. I said it was a cup washer earlier, but they're flat. And then we can pull the wheel right off of there. And you don't want to reuse these old wheels. You always want to replace the wheels when you're rebuilding a grinder. You have no idea what somebody did with those previous wheels. They might be cracked or something. It can be pretty dangerous. So removing that last nut. And then we can remove the inner flange. And then we've got two socket head screws. And these are what hold the inner cover in place. So once we've got it out of there, then this cover should slide right off the shaft. And there's a lot of stuff caked up inside there. And that is the felt retainer. And then here we are on the other side. And we have the inner flange again. This one's in there a little bit tighter. And we got the 2 socket head screws. I didn't want to do a whole lot of time lapse with this video, since this is the only video I've done so far on these grinders. Wanted to show as much as possible. And there's that inner cover. So then we have the felt retainer again. And we can see the bearings inside there now. So we're going to go ahead and remove the nut that holds the on-off switch in place. And under that there's an on-off panel that has some Delta graphics on it. And if that is really messed up, you can order a replacement one of those from that guy on eBay that I mentioned in the first video. But we'll see how that one cleans up. And here we've turned the whole thing upside down, and we're removing the bottom cover. So on my other Delta grinder, under this cover there was a capacitor, but this motor is a split phase motor, so no capacitor. No big deal. So the wiring here is not too complicated. I'm trying to decide what I'm going to disconnect first, so we're going to start with the switch. We're just going to undo the 2 leads that are going to the switch. And then we're going to put those screws back inside the terminal there on the switch so we don't lose them. And then we're going to mark these wires so we know where they came from. So what you should see is you've got your power cord coming in on the right side in the center hole, and it's got 3 wires coming out of it, but that ground is not even connected. So, or it's maybe connected on the outside of this housing, I don't recall. But we're going to connect it to one of the screws that mounts the base to the stator when we rewire all of this. And then you've got 2 wires, one on each side of the power cord, and each one of those has a white and a black lead coming out of them. And those go to the Twin-Lites. And then you've got 2 wires coming out of the stator, and then everything is just connected with those 2 wire nuts. So not overly complicated at all. We just need to mark everything well so we can put it all back together when we do reassembly, and hopefully this thing will crank up at that point. So all your whites are coming into one connector here that I'm pulling off and connecting to one of the wires coming out of the stator. not too cryptic there. All the whites connect to that. And then we can mark each one of those whites, but it's really not necessary since we're only dealing with a couple of colors here. And then the same thing for the other one, except it's all the blacks coming from the two Twin-Lites and then going to the switch and then coming back into that wire nut. So the switch is all wired on the black lead side. But like I said, not complicated at all. This definitely wasn't the case on my other grinder. My other grinder had 5 or 6 wires coming out of the stator. And it was a chore to figure out how to wire in the switch that would connect to the pedestal. On the outside, here we are removing the wire clamps that hold those wires inside the grinder itself. And then they've got nuts that hold that other part of the clamp inside the grinder base. And since everything's kind of rusted in there, I sprayed it down with some PB Blaster, and we're just going to use these channel locks and get those off of there. And here we are removing that last one. Just pop it through there. So next we're just going to remove the 2 screws that hold the base on the stator. And like I said before, this is where we will be connecting the ground when we rewire all of this. And then the base should just lift right off of there. There we go. That's the base. We've still got the serial number panel and the brass panel to remove, but we'll get to that. Next, we've got the bearing closure nut, and I'm just sort of tapping that around with a screwdriver and the brass hammer until it gets loose that I can spin it off of there. This is only on one side. I think it's the right side, but I don't recall exactly. And next we're going to be removing the 4 long screws, and each one of these have cap nuts on each end of them. So you got to kind of work them out of there. And for instance, on the left side there's one of the cap nuts. And then on this side, sometimes these are in here kind of tight and you got to kind of spin them out of there, the long screws. Those holes are not threaded, but yeah. If you don't have the left and right sides perfectly aligned, then there's angular pressure being applied to that screw. But we'll pull that out of there. And we'll do that for all 4 of these. Once I get it out of there, the cap nut's still on there pretty good, so we'll just use some vice grips. And lock that down. And then we should be able to spin that cap nut right off of there. And like I said, we're going to do that with all 4 of these long screws. And that is going to wrap up this video. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, please like and subscribe. In the next video part number 3, we will be finishing the disassembly. So, as always, I appreciate the support, and I will see you next time.